let's take a look at the code here. I've commented it pretty well so you can follow through and read it on your own. We have our libraries, outstream string, namespace standard, and then we have three functions and our driver function. So we'll start in the driver function. We call a function, our first function, to get the string from the user. That's up here. It's really simple. We don't really need to look in depth at that. Next, once we have the string, we call our main function that finds the palindrome and set it to the string answer, and then we print the answer. That's what the driver does, and it's in a infinite loop, so we can test multiple strings. In the function that was called find longest palindrome, we pass in the string, and we'll go ahead and start looking at this. We have three integer variables: the start, end, and the temp end. This temp end is different from the end index because this will be used to reset the start accordingly. Alright, and then we have a char start, that's just the character at the start index. We have the longest palindrome, that's the current longest palindrome, and then temp is the return value, and we're going to compare temp to the longest to see which one's longer. Alright, and then this is just setting up the variables for the first iteration. If we have a long string, we're going to be iterating multiple times. So this is just the first iteration. We set the start equal to the index 0 and the start char to whatever's there, and then end to the length of the string, -1. Alright, so then we go into a while loop, and our condition is the start index is less than the length of the string. This is because the palindromes need at least 2 characters to be a palindrome. That's why I use the less than, not the less than or equal to. This condition comes from the fact that, let's look at our whiteboard here. If our start is at 13, there's obviously nothing to compare. If it's at 12, we can at least compare A. So that's where that condition comes from. Alright, and then here we're simply calling another function that actually finds the palindrome. We pass in the start, end, and the character, the string, and the temporary end. The temporary end is passed in as reference, so we can use it in this function. Alright, and then next we check if there was no palindrome at all. If there was no palindrome, temp will be equal to nothing. And we set the start index to start index plus 1, so we're just moving it by 1 character, as we discussed. And then we're setting the character equal to whatever's there. And then on the other hand, we have a palindrome, so we need to compare its length to the longest palindrome's length. And if it's longer, then we set it as the longest palindrome. And then after that, we move the start index to whatever the end of that palindrome was plus 1. And I'll just show you in the whiteboard to exemplify this. Say we found this palindrome here. So this would be the temp end at 4, so we just increase it to 5. And now 5 is our new start, so we're going from there. That's what that's doing, and then at the end of this, we just return the longest palindrome. Now let's look at this function call. So we'll look at that function. Here it is. This function has a lot of nested loops and conditions, and it can get quite confusing. Just take a look at the source code and you'll be fine. So like I said, we have the start, end, start char, myString, and the temp end. So the first step here is to find a match from the end. So that's what we're doing. We're setting I equal to end and going backwards through the string. And we're checking if the character is equal to our start char. And if it is, then we break and set end index equal to that index. If we didn't find a match, then the end index is going to equal to -1. Alright, and then down here we're checking if the end index is equal to -1. That means there was no match. Then we just return an empty string. On the other hand, if there was a match, we need to check, we need to handle this case first off. One case that needs to be handled is if there's only 2 characters. So for instance, if we go to our whiteboard here, like let's say this was a palindrome on its own, so there's only 2 there. That's a case we have to handle. So we do that with this condition, and then we check if those 2 characters are equal. If they are, we return the substring. If they're not equal, then we return nothing. Alright, and then this else basically states there's more than 2 characters to compare. So we have to loop through the indices, and we're going to loop through the index minus start index divided by 2 because we're moving inward 2 characters at a time. I'll show you that real quick. When we're looking at this palindrome, trying to find it, we're comparing A and A, and then we would move inward. So we move this up to the left and this to the right. That's why we get the divided by 2. And we check each index relative to their brother index, and we check if they're the same. And if they are, we return that substring. And if not, that's down here, we have a non-match. We have to make sure, we have to basically check if that was the middlemost index. If it was, then we can't check any further. Let me show you in the whiteboard. So we have this B here at 11, and we're checking, and these don't equal, so we find the next B. But if this was the middlemost B, there wouldn't be any other B's to the left, so we'd have to break. So that's where this comes from. So on the other hand, it's not the middlemost, so we have to recursively call the same function given the end index minus 1. And that is set to, let's look here, the end index. So it'll look, let's say, so this is our end index. We're going to recursively call using the end index minus 1, which would be here. So we would look from here for a B. Alright, that's where those parameters come from, right here. So that's the code. Let's go ahead and run it. I've got leak code pulled up. That's where this question came from. And there's 2 examples. We'll just input these strings. So we'll input that, and it gives us BAB, and that's the answer right here. Our second example is CBBD. This is going to be a case where there's only 2 characters for the palindrome. So it gives us BB. Alright, and that was the case that we handled. So I encourage you to try this code on your own. Reference the source. It will be on a GitHub repository down in the description. Thanks for watching.